We have a number of participants I see as well as attendees this evening. And we will begin. We have no board and commission interviews. Is there anything on the regular agenda that we need to review? If not, we're going to go to meeting issues and updates, and we'll just go down the line and see if anyone has anything. Katie, I'll start with you. Is there anything that you have?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Emerson?
No updates, Mayor, but I'd just like to express a desire to sit in on the PCEB commission, just to be maybe a transition liaison. This is what is coming up, so I can get adjusted to their meeting process and their discussion topics.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Laura?
Only one, the Sustainability Commission did meet in late December. Two things, the work on the sustainability plan continues, but also they're working in partnership with Dave Buck and the Hub for a May Webster on Wheels event that we hope will introduce our east-west and north-south bike lanes.
Great. David, anything from you?
Yes, so you guys have probably already heard, but I just want to reiterate it for the public regarding the Traffic Advisory Commission. They are reviewing parking restrictions in Orchard Park and a stop sign and speed limit reduction on West Glendale. The police department recommended granting the parking restriction request in Orchard Park. However, the Traffic Advisory Commission is recommending a denial of the request. In addition, the Traffic Advisory Commission expressed a desire to revisit all existing restrictions and resident-only parking at a future meeting. Their stated purpose was to consider recommending removal of existing parking restrictions in the area of Webster University and Webster Groves High School. In regards to the West Glendale, a traffic survey indicated no serious safety issues with speed on West Glendale and that stop sign installation would not be warranted. Consequently, the police department recommended against both and the Traffic Advisory Commission concurred.
So David, just a question about, and in interest of full disclosure, I live in one of those areas of Webster Park where parking is restricted now. So I hear from a lot of people about this. So is there any specific action that has been asked to be taken at this particular time that we should be talking about, or do they want to go and evaluate generally and come back with a plan?
It sounds like they want to reevaluate. So I missed this meeting. I did not get notification until the morning of the meeting, and my schedule did not permit me to attend. And as a result, I can't answer that question.
Perhaps
Maybe.
the chief can, is he?
Curtis can, it looks like he may have stepped out.
He
Oh.
was down checking the doors. So
Okay, he'll be back. We can ask. Anything else, David?
That is all, Mayor. Thank you very much.
All right. Karen, do you have anything you want to suggest? Okay, Neil,
No, ma'am, nothing. Thank you.
Sarah? I skipped
No
you.
updates, thank you.
And Marie.
Yes, ma'am. I actually have quite a few. Wanted to extend another welcome to Chief Ellis, who has joined us. So glad you're here, sir. Yeah, 2 days in. So for those on Zoom, hopefully everybody will have an opportunity to meet him if you haven't already. And I can't extend a welcome to Chief Ellis without recognizing Assistant Chief Painter. He has been instrumental in this period of transition. So thank you, Chief Painter. Let's see, and I have a couple of events. Chamber Coffee and Connections is Friday, January 14th from 8 to 9 a.m. at City Hall. It is in person. I don't know if that's going to change or not. If it does, we'll give updates, but right now it's still in person. There's going to be coffee and pastries and a discussion on the use tax, and council welcome.
That was the 14th, Marie.
Yes, the 14th, 8 to 9 a.m. There's also the Chamber Luncheon, Thursday, January 20th. And I can also send this information out, Olive and Oak. And please RSVP to Eric. Because of our sponsorship, we have a couple of already paid for attendances. So if you RSVP to Eric, he can work on those with you. And the city is proud to be able to sponsor that. And then, let's see, I'd like to remind everybody, and especially those on Zoom, that tomorrow is the educational meeting for candidates. We have an exciting forum of candidates that are running. And so this is going to be an educational opportunity where city staff directors are going to share about their departments, and candidates can have an opportunity to ask directors questions. It is going to be on Zoom for the public. Candidates can be in person, however. And unfortunately, due to COVID, we are transitioning back to Zoom meetings. All boards and commissions meetings are going to be on Zoom. Council is going to continue to be in person unless council does not want to, and then, which we can certainly have that discussion. Staff can accommodate whatever council's preferences, but the community will continue to join us on Zoom for the foreseeable future. I do want to, for those folks watching, please just encourage people to continue wearing masks in city buildings. We've gotten several complaints from customers lately, particularly at the rec center. And staff is doing their best job to try to remind people to wear masks, but it's a difficult situation to be in, and they certainly don't want to argue with customers. And in light of keeping everyone safe, it would really be helpful if people would wear their masks when in city buildings. Lastly, ahead of our budget and ARP discussion, I want to thank Eric. The balancing act information that you guys are going to go through tonight, as well as the 5-year plan and just the general budget updates, it is a wealth of information. It certainly is not the first and only time that council will see it or the public, but tonight really creates a foundation for what is to come in terms of both our regular budget and ARP. And so we will really be asking council to hone in, give us some direction so that we can continue moving forward and bring back those pieces that are really important to you. So really excited about the discussion. So Mayor, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot there. All right. We're going to go on to our topics, and we're going to flip the charter review and the budget update topics. And we're going to start tonight with the charter review topic. And this is a continuation of our discussion about the possibility of placing a charter commission on the ballot. And I don't know if Neil wants to talk a little bit about this amendment process. Are you prepared to do that, Neil?
Yes, ma'am. So you have, you were forwarded documentation. This is, of course, in black and white, but it was done in color. And I want to thank Eric for putting a lot of this together and suggested that this was a good way to present it to you all, because it gives you all of the paths that might be available for charter revision and those concerns that surround it. So it breaks that out, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. But what we are doing and what we are talking about putting on there is, of course, going to fall under the purview of the Charter Review Advisory Board. So a Charter Review Advisory Board is something that is created, again, in this instance, it could be by ballot initiative, or it could be at the direction of the council. Either way, it is only an advisory board, so you are free as a council to accept, reject any part of what they've had. Ultimately, if you accept any part of it, then we would fall under the provision where council would call for an amendment based upon those recommendations, and it would, of course, go to the people in still a ballot form, and they would have to determine it that way. But these are the ways in which you do it. So again, as I've said to you, you can sort of forego this process if you decide to do that and simply call a Charter Review Advisory Board on your own, or you can leave it up to the electorate to make the decision one way or another. If they vote yes, that they want you to form a Charter Review Advisory Board, it's still advisory. Their recommendations are non-binding. It would be up to you as a council to decide what to do with those things. So within those general considerations, if there are any questions, maybe that's the better way to proceed. I think the information that you have is explanatory. And I think you can sort of figure that out. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right, let's see who has a question.
I have kind of I don't know that it's minor, but it's actually probably for Katie rather than Neil. Since we already have things on the ballot, is there an additional cost in adding this?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Neil, these are 6 different options we have.
Yes.
Okay.
I will tell you, in the farthest corner to the right, this council called Charter Commission, that actually is arguably not available to you. It is actually a recitation. What we have in the charter is actually a recitation of what the Constitution of the state of Missouri says regarding forming charter commissions. And it's really more for the formation of a charter commission that creates the charter that we have now. But it does reference it still in our charter because the language in the Constitution does as a way to amend the charter. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it really is sort of redundant to the council recommendation section. So, but these are the ways. So again, there are ways that ultimately get it on a ballot and let the electorate decide what you're going to do once you as a council make that decision.
So, I'm a little,
This is honored.
You're on.
I'm a little, in regards to the 2020 amendment that we put on the ballot that was passed by the voters, was that, did that require us to, every 8 years, whenever we decide to start it, create a charter commission or a charter review advisory board?
Charter Review Advisory Board.
All right,
It's on the back page, Mr. Franklin.
say that again.
The charter provisions on the back page. Flip it over.
So there's a second page and it's there,
Oh, okay. perfect.
right? And it's 15.22. At least every 8 years in conjunction with the mayoral election, the mayor and the city council should submit to the voters the question, shall there be a charter review advisory board?
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
And so the decision that we're faced with tonight is whether to put this on the ballot in April of this year, in 2022, or to put it on in 2026.
Yes, ma'am.
What this also points out is that at any particular point in time, the council can call a charter advisory review board. It doesn't make any difference whether we have this or not.
And I think that would restart the clock, Mayor. So again, once every 8 years. So if you do it within an 8-year period, the clock starts again.
Okay. All right. Any thoughts from council?
Well, I said last time that I have a little bit of mixed feelings because we're at a particularly divisive, I guess is a word I'd use, not actually, I wish there was a different word to use that I could think of, time. So, but I do believe that the Charter Review Advisory Board is what we did commit to. I want to make sure that we're very careful that we come up with a very good process about selecting who's going to be on that. Should the voters decide that they'd like for us to have a Charter Advisory Board. The political scientist in me wants to be very careful when we mess with our founding documents, that we're very deliberative and that we get a lot of good advice from people who know lots about governmental structure. Because frankly, there's a lot of competing ideas out there. And who knows where the recommendations would be. I also like the fact that the advisory board makes this a collaboration with council rather than something that the advisory board does off on its own.
All right.
I have one other question, Neil, whoever. So once it's we put this in motion and we decide that it's decided that a charter advisory board will be created, is there a specific verbiage to say this is your not duty, but this is the directions to review the charter?
Hold on, I'm a little confused by your question because are you asking for the council to create a charter review advisory board or to put that question to the voters?
No, either one. My
Yeah.
question is that once that board is created, is there a specific process that we give them as direction to follow?
That's a very good question.
And the answer is no. So if you look at section on the second page of your document, section 4.430, where it talks about duties. Now, this is in the code, not the charter itself. But in the code, it says the Charter Review Advisory Board shall act in an advisory capacity to the council in matters pertaining to the amendment of the charter. So there's no lines, there's no limits. Everything is on the table.
Okay.
But if you continue that, it says that as may be directed by the council from time to time, is that to the duties, and shall make reports to the council regarding matters referred to the board by the council. So the direction for what the council should, or the charter review group should look at really comes from the council. And I think that did the last time I remember we did that. The council said, look at this, this, and this.
So I don't think that limit exists. I think that once they're formed, I think that they have a bit of a roving commission. And I see what you're saying, but it says that they can look in all matters pertaining to the amendment of the charter of the city. It says only as may be directed by the council from time to time, but I think that's in the creation of the board rather than in the subject matter that they can look at.
Boy, that would be something though that we should really be careful about
Yes,
with
ma'am.
interpretation.
Yes, ma'am.
My concern is that, since charter is a huge document, it can go on for years and years and years and years. Because once they make the recommendations to the council, we can accept it or we can reject it. And they might be working
Right.
for the next 80 years.
Right. And I will say one other thing regarding this language. This was written with the idea that your charter advisory commission would be created by act of council. What we've done in the amendment is allowed it to be created according to the direction of the electorate. So it adds a little different dimension here, because if you were simply making a decision as to the formation of an advisory commission, then you could say, we want you to form for this purpose. But the broader language of the amendment, which is found in section 15.22, is that you're going to establish an advisory commission. Now, you can give them specific things to address, but I think that perhaps there is a conflict
saying.
with what's going on there.
I
So-
think I see what you're saying, that the section 15.22 is a much broader way of looking at the charter. Wow.
Yes,
Which is a really kind of
which is,
scary thing, because you're giving this group of people carte blanche to
Right.
delve into the charter and do what they want with it,
right.
as opposed to when council forms a charter review advisory board, like in that third column that's there, council can point to various auto-sorted things that they'd like them to look at. That, to me, that's an enormous difference.
What are we scared of? I mean, you keep saying that we're worried, so please give me specifics. What are we scared of?
I'm sorry, David. I didn't
What are
understand.
we scared of? What are we scared of giving a charter review advisory board the ability to review the charter?
But I think it's a mistake to equate a concern regarding the magnitude of the task to fear.
Yeah.
Because the magnitude of the task is significant when it affects these fundamental documents. And so again, part of the reason that the Constitution has all of these provisions regarding the amendment of the charter is to make it difficult to amend, not easy. And so again, so that people are engaged and so that people are voting. And again, I think that equating that with fear is perhaps a mistake, but
Yeah, and so David, I will answer that. One of the things that we know is some of the things that even by initiative that have been proposed simply don't pass muster on the Missouri Constitution. And so my concern is that we have a well-staffed, well-informed commission so that we're not fighting with our own commission about what's actually constitutional under the state of Missouri. And that's just what I mean by the parameters. I also do worry though about time frame. And so this is my follow-up, and then I'll let you go again, which is there anything in here that prohibits us establishing a timeline for the
No.
advisory board?
no, other than, again, it depends on when you're doing it, okay? So if you as a council right now were to say, we want to establish an advisory board without going to the electorate, you want to establish one, okay? You could do timelines, you could focus them on certain things, you can limit the scope of what they're doing as opposed to a roving commission, okay? If it's by vote under 15.22 under the amendment to the charter, I think those same limitations don't necessarily exist except perhaps as to time.
And again, I'm not suggesting that we set a really short timeline. I just, as Emerson said, it's a huge document and you could take years going through this. So, okay, so Neil, I apologize for repeating back to you what you said, but just to make sure I understand. If we go the initiative route, the limitations that we can put on or the parameters that we might put on really don't exist except maybe for a timeline.
Yes, ma'am.
And if we did it ourselves, we have a wider range of options in terms of setting the agenda and parameters for the advisory board.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to give clear, direct, give clear direction to this board of what we want to have done. And we need to use the process or the format that's going to give us the best option for that.
I think, Emerson, you have a really good point there. If there are 4 or 5 things that you want, we as council want a board to look at, we can specify those if we call our own charter review advisory board, which I keep thinking of as column 3. Quite frankly, David, I am afraid of saying, hey, here, take the whole charter and do what you want with it. It scares me because I see this as a very important founding document like the Constitution, and we would never give somebody, a group, the Constitution and say, do what you want with it. I'm afraid of that.
And then how do you determine who this advisory board is?
It's the council
and
that
what
gets to
their-
choose.
I know, but we get to choose. But what do we base our choice on? How do we know the extent of the experience of the people in terms of their ability to comprehend, understand? I mean, do we take that position that we only want these people
You're not on.
to look at this? I mean, so again, it's a very extensive document, and if you're thinking in terms of even optics, and if you have an electorate that wants the charter to be reviewed and want us to look at it, well, then we call a charter review advisory board. Well, then we determine who the people are that are going to be doing it. So again, you now also have the concern that the electorate will feel like we only selected people that are going to exercise their the review in align with what we want to see. I mean, just how does this?
It would be up to the council to choose the members of the Charter Review Advisory Board, which is a very, to me, extremely serious job. And we would have to figure out who we believe has the background to be able to do that.
But I do think that that's an accomplishable task. And one of the things I think that we would have to do is set that out before we solicit applications from the public, right? Here's the
Yes.
qualifications that we are looking for. And I'm not sure, as we've done some of the appointments, that we always do as good a job of that as we should. And so putting that process together in advance of soliciting applications for the Charter Review Commission, I think can solve some of that.
But let me throw out, if I may, just to think about in that regard. If you don't know what it is you want them to do, if you're not controlling what it is, how do you know what to look for?
Right.
So again, how do you decide who's qualified on this if there are not specific tasks that you of a council have in mind? So in this instance, the reason that was created was so that column 3, which says the council called charter review, is that you all have something on your mind that you want them to address. You know how to tailor the choices to people then that would have the skills to address the question that is in your mind. And so again, it becomes a whole lot harder when it's just here's the charter, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think?
But as I understand you, even if we do it by initiative petition, we can still say to the Charter Commission, these are the things that we'd like for you to focus on.
Sure.
They're just not limited by that.
That's correct.
So it's not as if we're not going to give them any ideas about some of the things. I mean, for example, I think Pam said a while ago that there needs to be more gender neutral language and inclusive language in the charter. Something we could ask them to work on, but I do understand they're not bound by our list, but it's also not just saying, do whatever you want. We don't have any ideas whatsoever.
So there's two.
Can I? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I just wanted to clarify though, because I understand the gravity of the possibility here, but everything that would be proposed back to the council.
Mhm.
Correct? So if there are things that are proposed that aren't, that don't follow the state law or our own code, then we're able to reject them at that time, correct? Or is there something about that process that I'm not understanding?
No, that would be correct. You would ultimately, it still comes back to you to either accept it or reject it or amend it in whatever form that you think is appropriate. But the question that was on the table is, how do you decide who is on this particular commission? And what I was suggesting is that it becomes much easier to decide who that is if there are specific questions that you want them to address, as opposed to, again, just sort of a floating commission about do whatever it is you think you need to do.
Sarah took the words out of my mouth. There's two safety mechanisms here. There's the safety mechanism of the review, the advisory board their recommendations will come to council. Council would then determine which of those recommendations will be submitted to the electorate, and the electorate then has to pass it. So to imagine that this document's going to be changed overnight is absurd.
I'm not saying that. I see the charter process probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years. You know,
And what's wrong with that? Because it is such an important document. It is, as the mayor has indicated, a founding document. Let's give them the time to actually review it.
No, that's no doubt. I agree with that. It's just that when we give them this task, here are the things that we want you to do. We want you to update the terminology to be instead of 1940 or 50, up into the 2000s. And here's, somebody said gender
Neutral.
Neutral. I think that's the direction that we give them. But we must be able to give them direction. This is what we want you to come back with. If we don't, then we're going to be, somebody mentioned, we're going to be fighting with the commission about things that we want them to do. We'll just make sure that we give them clear instructions on what they should accomplish.
So let me ask Neil something. What we passed said every 8 years we would have a charter review advisory board. So if we call our own charter review advisory board within the next year or so, we would be fulfilling that without going to the voters and asking for this wholesale throw it open commission. So we could still have a charter review advisory board working soon.
Yes, ma'am.
With the direction that Emerson is talking about.
Yes, ma'am.
And that option, we do not have to go to the electric to say,
No, you would ultimately have to go if you decided that there was something that you as a council wanted to do in terms of amending the charter itself.
yes, I know the amendments have
Yes.
to go to, but
Right.
uh,
But other than that, you would not have to go to the electorate to do that.
Okay.
I just want to address both of those things, what Emerson said and what Jerry said. First, Emerson, in regards to, let's say that that the electorate passes and says, go have a charter review advisory board. And they go on a roving commission and they propose things that we did not deem adequate or things that we did not recommend. We, as a council, have the ability to or put an amendment on the charter into the voters at any time, just as we did with 1522. So that option is still available to us. And in regards to the idea of like, hey, we can now circumvent 1522 and not go to the voters by just creating our own charter review advisory commission, I think goes against the plain language and the plain intent of what 1522 says.
Well, I would disagree a little bit because I don't want to take that arrow out of our quiver, us being able to do it ourselves.
Absolutely, we can always
But
do it.
where you and I do agree is that when this went forward 2 years ago, I don't know what time is anymore. We did suggest, or at least imply, that this next mayoral election, we would let the public decide whether this was a necessary thing for our community. And that is important to remember.
All right. So this is somewhere on our agenda and we will have,
but Katie, what was the time frame we need to make a
yeah,
decision?
when do we have to make a,
If you don't want to have a special meeting to approve it, the January 18th meeting would be the third reading and the vote.
okay,
You have your first and second reading this evening to move forward on the 18th.
okay, good enough.
And then the deadline is the 25th to get the information to them.
All right.
So
Okay.
So we have a
Is
little
that- do
time
we
yet.
have that already?
All right, thank you. I think it's been a good discussion but we need to move on to the budget. And I'm going to turn this over to Eric for the budget update.
Get set up here quick, Mayor, and I'll be right with you.
Well, Eric is doing that, Mayor.
Yes.
So it looks like we've got about half an hour left. If we can run a little over into the regular meeting, that would be helpful. This discussion, the regular meeting is incredibly light and will probably be very quick, so it will not extend anybody's time. But I think the ARP and the regular budget discussion really is the heart of the topics, if that would be okay.
Yes, that's fine. If it runs through, it runs through. That's okay.
I'm gonna run cameras while we're doing this too. There we go. All right, so. All right, so ARP and budget matters, just a short presentation of 58 slides for you tonight, along with the balancing act and the 5-year plan. So we are going to go over 2021 budget performance, 2022, the budget year to date, 2023 budget planning, which is started. We have started planning for our next budget process and the American Rescue Plan funding. I just want to announce first, as we talk about 21 budget, as we gave you an update about the status of the audit at our last meeting, we have found our balancing and reconciliation issue. So items are resolved. So the audit is in its final stages, and comprehensive annual report will be issued at the end of this month, and we'll have an update for you here in Q1. So all extensions and other filings have been taken care of. So we are in a good spot in that regard. And so I appreciate the work of our finance team getting that project done. Good. So let me move on. You have in front of you tonight 2 documents that look numbers, I'm sorry, I'm going to find them here. They look like this. There are New World reports. They say budget performance report. One of them says fiscal year 2021. That is the actual numbers. And rather than trying to cut and paste numbers into these slides, all 50, some of them, I gave you the numbers, so you have them. For the public who's watching, all of this is on our budget page. So you can go to webstergroves.org and go to finance and budget, and you will see all these reports and updates we're doing tonight. As we look at the slides on the screen, the blue bar is going to be fiscal year 21 budget, and red is the actual. So if we spent more than the budget, higher red. If we underspent the budget, it'll be higher on blue.
That's clever.
So these are our fund revenues and expenditures. So all funds right here is our first one. This is the all funds. And I'll give you these numbers since I have them. Our all funds revenue was budgeted at 25.5. We came in at 25.19. Our expenditures were budgeted at 32.4, and we spent 29.4 million. All funds. Just to be very clear real quick, this does not include library. We hold those funds for certain things, but this is not including the library or the American Rescue Plan. The general fund, we have revenue of 19.3 million, expenditures of 18.2. And then in the revenue of 19.3, we got 18.2. So the budget was a little higher than what we received. Again, this is a common theme we'll hear in the general fund. 19.05 and expenditures in the budget 17.7. So a good job overall of holding expenditures down across fiscal year 21 to meet the budget. So when you look across the lines, obviously, we spent less than we took in, which is important in the general fund, which will improve our position ultimately. I'm going to roll through these. These are the other funds. I'm sorry about the transcripts popping up on the bottom, but you have the public police and fire pension fund, revenue and expenditures. Again, blue is budget, red is actual. Old Webster is next. Very small compared to the police and fire pension, but they also have a positive amount. I'll pull this up and out of the way so you can. So this is Old Orchard. So this is all relative, obviously, but Old Orchard, you can see a very high budget in terms of expenditures, and then, but still came in underneath that. They decided to use much of their revenue. Much of that is in their lighting program and like facades and such. Crossroads, again, same thing. We had a good amount of expenditures, all coming in under that point. Debt fund, very good. Our debt came in and we paid out right about the amount we took in. So good numbers there in 21. Next one is going to be, this is Firehouse 2. You can see obviously the bonds were sold in 20, not in 21. So there's very little revenue, but lots of expenditure. The bills for paying for the first part of construction for Firehouse 2. Public safety fund revenue, I want to highlight, why are there negative revenues? Why do you see that? In our accounting systems, we highlight operating transfers to other funds as a reduction of income. So public safety fund revenue may have taken in $1.5 million, but we're going to put $1.5 million right back out and put it into the public safety general fund to pay for public safety. So that's why you're going to see them shown as negatives. And there are no expenditures because that fund didn't spend anything. The general fund spent that money for the purposes therein. This is street improvement fund. Again, we had a budget that had calculated to spend more than we took in revenue, and we did as part of the street improvement plan. Capital improvement, budget revenue. Revenue came in a little higher than budget. Expenditures well under budget. So good results there. We'll improve that fund balance position. Sewer lateral, much the same. And by the way, all the numbers for those at home are out online on the budget page too, so people can see that. Stormwater revenue, same thing. Good beat budget expectations in revenue. And then we underspent compared. Part of that is we moved the Elm and Kirkham culvert to this budget in 2022. A good chunk of that is in this budget here that was not spent. And this is Park Improvement Fund. Revenues matching the budget, expenditures well under budget in the Park Improvement Fund. Finally, the fixed assets, here's our depreciation. There's our about $440,000 of depreciation. That's an expense. And then this is grant fund. Again, grant fund negative because we were expected to take in a grant and transfer it. So it shows as a negative in the budget. We did not make that transfer. So we had a good amount of revenue. That transfer was encumbered over till the next year. Then you can see expenditures here well below what we received in grants. They're expected to pay out. So I want to look at the actual revenues for the general fund. These are the actual numbers received. We did very well and very secure as we look across all of our revenue streams, property taxes, the intergovernmental fees. So this is county road and bridge tax, sales tax, cigarette tax, motor vehicle fees and such. Very good. Sales taxes here. This is our biggest driver. Again, we are beating the budget last year. Licenses beat the budget. We came in right on the numbers on, I'm sorry, I missed that one. That was inspection fees and permits. These next ones are where we see the concerns, and this translates through to this year. Utility taxes, as I reported when we did this in September, down. Our budget was 3.27. We only collected 2.8 million. So this is our second biggest, classification of revenue. The same, and again, you can't see it underneath the transcript, but fines. This is our court revenue. With court being closed, 640,000 in the budget. Only 208 collected. Service fees down slightly, 740 to 678. Recreation fees down from 2 to 1.5 million in 21. So again, closures at the service center, other events not being able to happen, $500,000. So those are the areas where our revenue underperformed our budget expectations.
Yep. You may not know this off the top of your head, but when we look at recreation fees, that was a big driver in fiscal year 20 as
Correct.
well. Have we closed the gap at all between 20 and 21? I guess I'm asking, is the recreation fee revenue improving from one fiscal year to the next since we've been open a little bit more?
When we pull the 5-year plan up, I have those numbers in front of me and I'll be able to answer that for
Thank
you.
you.
So this is just department expenditures, going to roll through these and show how good our departments did at holding the line. Council, your budget was a little over because of the elections. Just election costs were not budgeted. That's minor, no issues there in the budget overall, minor numbers. Boards and commissions, city clerk, the executive budget, all under budget for 21. Human resources, finance, municipal court, and legal. Legal slightly over, and part of that is due to we finished up some lawsuits, and so bills are coming in on lawsuits that weren't budgeted. Information technology was under, public affairs was well under. I want to explain that disparity. Public affairs, when the position was created, had the whole year funded in the budget, even though it was only about 2 months of the budget year left. So it's not that they were that frugal. They just simply had way more money than they could spend in those 2 months. Customer support, just slightly over, not material amount. Insurance, that's our risk management, our pooled insurances that we are paying came in under budget as well. Police, under budget. Fire, just slightly over budget last year overall, and police shared services, right on. Obviously, that's mostly ECDC. Public Works under budget. Parks and Rec well under budget by 800,000. Again, as you know,
Oh,
great
that's
job out
good.
there. As recreation items have closed, we let people go. Of course,
That's
that
the-
means some folks aren't getting a wage, but we regulated the service to meet the need.
Decline.
Planning and development under budget as well. You've seen these numbers. I just want to go through them on our final overtime for the 21. Human resources, a slight bump there. Municipal court, well under budget. Finance had about $200 over. City clerk was a little bit over, but nothing, again, not material in any way to the budget. Customer support, planning and development, public works, park and recreation, all well under budget or not utilizing at all. This is the one we've talked about many times. Police, 95K budget came in at 62,000, fire 239 and 302. So is the final for 21. We'll go into more of those as we talk about 22 numbers. We've also talked about separation payouts and their impact on the budget. I'm going to move these out of the way so you can see more of the screen here. So sick time, compensatory time, vacation accrued, and there is in the fire CBA for those who are covered under the union, you get the uniform allowance if you leave partway through the year. So we had 22 employees taking separation payouts over the course of fiscal year 21 for a total of 225,000, the low payment $185, the high payment of $59,000. The vacation time, obviously, and compensatory time, there's nothing you can do about that. We owe them that right. If there is a tool, if we want to address them, that would really be about the accrual and then managing compensatory time, the amount of vacation people can earn. Sick time, and the reason it's up there is the one that this is an option that we grant at the city to do that payout. 8 employees received $99,000 in fiscal year 21.
And Eric, these amounts were not accrued or part of the budget. It was-
Correct. There's some extra money if we know about retirements put in, but it's sometimes, when is a person going to retire? We don't know. So again, we have talked about in this coming budget process, creating a centralized pool and trying to put an actuarial look on how many folks are going to leave. But also this is highlighting this so we can talk about, and this is at the manager's discretion, but policy changes and the council support for policy changes on how we manage these kinds of unfunded liabilities.
Is this sick time payout where they get to accrue the sick time and carry it over if they don't use it? And when they leave, they can take it. Is that what this is?
Yes, so some yes and no, but what the sick time payout is, so we currently have a policy that if someone reaches age 50 and 10 years of service and they exit service, whether they're retiring or not, then they are paid out for portions of that sick time. That's a pretty unheard of and antiquated policy, as I've shared with you all before. So that is something that I want to have further discussions, and there's different ways to look at it, but we're also going to be talking about the comp and class study, where there's going to be recommendations to bring some salaries up to the market rate and how we also retain employees and get those skilled employees. So there's going to be some increases or requests for increase of funding. And so what we're really talking about is how the work service has changed. And are we now paying people at the front end, which I would say yes, of careers in terms of recruitment and retaining, rather than on the back end of careers?
Which is harder to budget for.
It's incredibly hard to budget for. And so, but with that comes some real uncomfortableness, because you are talking about employees that have been here and were hired on with a certain expectation. But it is an unfunded liability that's very difficult to maintain. So I would like us to continue that conversation and keep in the balance that we're also talking about increasing salaries on the front end. So how do we balance that?
I just want to talk about the high payment that we made. That's with the sick time and vacation time accrued, all of it together. And that was,
So for that one employee, I can tell you that was vacation and sick time. So this is the benefit. If you think of sick time and you're an over 20-year employee, 1,200 hours is your maximum accrual. That's over half a year's salary, and you get paid 50% of that time. So if you have 1,200 hours, you've been here 20 years, you're going to get 50% of those 1,200 hours. So your closing rate when you leave times 50% of 12, times $600.
I mean, this is an unintended golden parachute to some degree.
It could be viewed that way. I don't know if it was intended that way, sir, but it certainly could be viewed that way. And many have in many other jurisdictions. Vacation time, again, we have to pay out at the rate. Those are accruals, and that's a property right that's given to vacation. The tool that's at our discretion there, and we've started to look at other jurisdictions, is how much you accrue, right? How many hours of vacation folks can hold and take. And so that is a conversation as well.
When you look at the budget that was created for 2020 fiscal year 21,
Yep.
which was under the previous administration, right? Was that $59,000 included in the budget anywhere?
There was some funds for it. I think probably closer to 30, I believe, was included in the budget.
All right.
But again, that goes to, if we know someone's leaving, You know,
You put
they'll
it
take a
in.
ballpark on when are they leaving, how much are they going to have. Some folks spend down, some folks, know about the policy and are going to keep it. So
And what was the budget amount in relation to the 225?
overall, and from from the conversations I've had, I think well under $100,000, probably
And-
closer to 75, spread across the departments where they knew people were leaving. So some of these separations will happen, right? A person leaves to go take another job. It's not a retirement. We're going to have to pay out vacation. We know that that's not negotiable. So it's expected to be absorbed in the department budget. But again, with some of these larger and the fact that we are top heavy in longevity for many of our employees, how do we budget for that liability?
When I bring that up, because there are rumors circulating indicating that this council is not adequately planning budget-wise. And I just want to demonstrate that the problems arose in the previous administration with some previous individuals that were responsible for the budget. So I think it's disingenuous to suddenly put all blame on this council for the inability to budget properly previously.
In addition to maintaining a policy that, we're asked, why did people that were here so long just all of a sudden quit? Well, you can walk away with a $60,000 check that might incentivize you to quit. But I just can't wrap my mind around that whole policy of how is that allowed, how is that accrued, and then especially in a manner that we don't even budget for. We can't budget for. I don't, maybe I just don't, I don't get it.
So Madam Mayor, if I can, and I'm sorry, Councilman Smith, in terms of the past practices and policies, those are certainly in place. As I shared with council and employees, as of January 1st, I did change the policy of the sick time payout for employees coming on January 1st and after. What I would like council's help in deciding, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but this is teeing it up for those future conversations, is what do we do for those employees, if anything? Maybe the answer is we don't change anything, but that also means we're not going to be able to do as much in terms of paying people an actual increased rate. But the conversation, is how do we address those employees that have been here previously? So that policy did change. We also changed the bonus sick leave, if you will. So
Yeah.
what that is for employees that don't take their sick leave, they would then get bonus vacation days, which also is a liability in terms of cost. And for people listening, I understand that the term liability sounds rather cold. It's financial terms, it's human resources terms in terms of the unfunded payments. We don't mean staff or liability. So I want to caution, because even when I hear myself say it, it sounds more terse than it's meant to be. But in terms of those sick bonus days payouts, I'll repeat it. If people did not take vacation, they were sick leave, they were rewarded with vacation days. It was really hard on the organization. And so that changed as well. Plus the plain fact that we continue to be in a pandemic and we do not want to incentivize people for coming
We
to
don't
work
want
sick.
sick
We can't
people
do
to
it.
come to work.
So hopefully everybody understands why that one was done. So we're starting to make really slow policy changes, but there's more to come. So thank you.
You want me to move on? Ready?
Mhm.
All right, 22. So where we are today, I think we've just talked through all the questions that are out there. So let me get into our 22 budget update. Same charts. This teal middle bar is now this year to date. The red bar is where we were as of last fiscal year on this date. So you can see where we're lining up. So this is all data as of yesterday, Monday. It does not, it includes 12 of the 26 pay periods. So we hope to get the pay period that people are going to be paid for this week. Data just wasn't available and I didn't want to delay the presentation. So 22 to date, I'll get this up out of your way again so you don't have to look at the pictures. This is all funds revenue. All funds revenue, we are at 24.3 in the budget. We have taken in 9.73 million all funds, change that number, 10.3 million all funds. We were 10.8 million last year and 30.3 in all fund expenditures budgeted at 10 million across the board. So right even with where we were last year on all funds. General funds Here we have a budget of 17.1 million in revenue. We've taken in 5.6. We've, at this point last year, we were at 7.8. I want to explain that change because this is a huge point. In the 21 budget, there was $2 million included as a transfer out of the reserve, the rainy day fund. That was done by this point last year. They had pulled the money in. So that was counted as revenue in. So we're really only 800,000 difference. And I'll explain those revenue streams and where that is in a minute. Our spending, however, is right in line. We're right smack in where we're supposed to be. So again, the difference in this delta is the transfer from the balance reserve. Across the funds, public pension fund here, looking good where we have been. Old Webster again, and you see that negative there. That's a transfer out to the general fund to deal with Parks and Rec. They pay Parks and Rec folks to do flowers and things like that across the districts. Same with Old Orchard and Crossroads. Those negatives are those transfers out. They exceed the actual revenue they're taking in. So we have expected to use a little of their fund balance in their budgets. Expenditures well in line. Old Orchard lagging behind a little bit last year because they're not doing so much on lights. Debt fund revenue, we have not received much in the debt fund revenue, this year to date, not showing up there. A few expenditures, but again, the payments haven't been made yet, and those will come due in the spring. Firehouse 2, very small amount of expenditures and revenues in this budget going on, simply because we're in that phase of construction. Public safety fund, same thing. Again, revenues budgeted below, so we have not yet made the transfer. That's why you see those revenue numbers above the line. So street improvement fund, same thing. We are short of expenditures on the street improvement fund. Nothing material, I think, that we need to worry about, but not tracking there. So that could just be timing of work and other things that are happening at Public Works. Capital improvement fund, the revenue exceeding where we were last year there. Expenditures below, and that part of that is because our budget for capital improvement, and we historically, you'll approve something in the spring in the budget, such as this past spring, and then we'll do the next year is when we really hit a lot of those capital improvement projects on actuating them. Sewer lateral fund revenue, much the same, doing just fine there. Stormwater fund revenue, everything looks good from my expectations. Again, that expenditure budget is for the culvert at Elm and Kirkham. Park improvement fund expenditures matching and where revenue is at. So fixed assets, we have done no depreciation costs yet, and grant fund revenue and expenditures, we have received no grant fund revenue in the grant fund. You will start to see some of that. I think you're approving DFIBs tonight, which are a part of that process. And other expenditures, not yet. Some in the negative as grant funds have expended out. General fund revenues year to date. So here's our revenues where we're at. Again, property taxes, intergovernmental, sales tax, licenses, inspection fees and permits, very stable for us. These are revenue lines I don't have to lose much sleep over. We're matching where we generally have been. And again, most of these the first three are collected by other parties, so we don't deal with them. Licenses are at the front desk along with inspection fees and permits. Utility taxes, you can see we're lagging where we were last year. Now, last year we were down and now we're still slow. Utility taxes. I'm going to flip ahead my line here and see where we are, what number that is. We should, last year we were at 1.1 million. Right now we're at 885,000. So slow there. Other than that, we generally are okay across rec fees. We're ahead of where we were last year. And we'll look at the whole back to normal, if I can use that term, when we get to the 5-year plan.
Eric,
Yep.
Yep. On the utility taxes, so did we just overshoot the projection or?
So utility taxes are interesting. I think when we look at, I don't think we overshot the projection necessarily, but I think when we look at the 5-year plan, you'll start to see some of that history on utility taxes. It's just an interesting line. And from what I gather from talking to some folks, it's getting harder and harder to collect. And I don't know, we don't collect that. That's, run through the county and such, but utilities are almost too big to fail and almost too big to collect from. And so I wonder in some ways if there isn't a collection issue that's going on there as well.
And the weather makes an enormous difference on this. And we just came through a summer that was fairly decent, where the air conditioning, the sprinkler systems were barely used. And now all this heating that we're not doing, the weather has the biggest impact on those utility taxes. You want bad weather.
General fund expenditures. So departments year to date, everything is looking good. You can see blue bars versus red bars. Executives a little higher, and that's Douglas Hill expenditures. You approved that budget amendment, so they were in that budget. You know, that's going to be hot. We never budgeted for them or planned on that. So these are the things reimbursed by Mr. Chapman's group, but they count as expenditures. So human resources right on. Finance is higher. I want to explain that. That's like $225,000 higher. We have centralized electricity and gas and oil payments in finance. So that budget has never existed in finance to centralize those payments. It's been spread across departments with those facilities. So now it shows in the finance budget versus last year. Municipal court and legal doing just fine. IT, public affairs, customer support, insurance, all in line with where we should be. Police and fire doing very well. We will talk about overtime. That is a concern, but other than that, we're doing good. Public Works, Parks and Rec, Planning and Development. So, you know, departments are meeting expenditures, which is great when I look at it from that. Again, lots of budget authority, as you can see, left 6 months to go in the budget year. So the pressures again that we talked about the last time. Overtime, here is fire this 6 months. So we do have a large overtime budget here and an exceeding budget. Budget is 256,000. Right now they're at 334,000. That does not again include the overtime for the pay period just ended. 172 last year at this time. And police, not over budget, but you know, catching up to their $90,000 budget with 74,000 this year.
So could you talk just a little bit about how the addition of the 3 firefighters might impact that overtime budget?
So the 3 firefighters, I believe that are hired are replacements for full-time positions. So the floaters have yet to be hired. And
Correct.
so certainly.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I got confused
that's
about
fine.
which positions. Okay.
So the new hires are full-time replacements and
Okay.
you know, full-time employees of the city. The floaters, I'll use that term, they are the temporary full-time employees that will be hired. We stop and think about it. Obviously, there will be at some point a new battalion chief appointed. A captain will likely move up from that role. We'll have a captain vacancy that someone will move into. So
Yeah.
those replacements, and then a captain who's on military leave, certainly will have to have somebody moving into that role. That floater will fill in that role to help avoid mandatory overtime to fill the mandatory minimum staffing requirements.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.
And so separation payouts, this is again through 12 of the 26 pay periods. 12 employees have separated for payments of $151,000, low payment of $412,000, high payment of $50,000, sick time payout to 4 employees at $76,000.
Was that 151 budgeted?
Not in its entirety, no.
But this has been going on for years, correct?
Yeah, this has been, as far as I understand the policy, for some years, yes, so.
Employees are leaving. That's what's pushing that.
So I'm gonna move forward into 23 unless there's other 22 questions. I feel 22 is going pretty good. Don't have any major issues or concerns other than obviously we do have overtime pressures that we're going to need to address and then structural liability issues. All right. So 23, got 2 things to talk about, the budget calendar and the 5-year plan. We'll start with the budget calendar. I'll pull it up for a second and you all have it in front of you. We're going to start a little bit earlier this year on our process. You'll see that calendar in front of you shows last year's dates and then this year's dates that we're going to start on the budget process. And what that means for you is we're going to use balancing act, which we'll see for ARP, but also for community input on the budget, because we think there's going to be some big decisions for community input. We are going to have the budget delivered to council 2 weeks early on April 19th. So the first meeting of the next council will be delivered the budget from the city manager and have increased council work sessions. So you see we have scheduled 4 of them between April, both twice in May and then the early June, which we would have in line with the public hearing should we need that. And of course can schedule any other special ones along the way. One of the things that we have been examining and talking with the auditors, and especially since there may need to be some council priorities that go into this budget and some really hard decisions, is an amendment process. You know, last year we received some direction from you. We should put this in, we should take this out. That direction's okay, but there's no documentation or backup to, that's what the council wants to have done. So we're creating a formal budget motion form that you can fill out, you know, if you want to send it to us to like, what does that mean? Where can I get money to do this? Go through that and have a true legislative process on budget amendments. So the point of the work sessions obviously is to inform you, let you ask the questions, make sure you're getting that information, but then have an actual legislative process on the amendment so that we can have that documentation if there are changes.
So in terms of process, then, if I'm looking at this calendar, you're going to deliver the draft budget
April 19th.
April 19th.
will then everything that changes from that draft budget out of these 3 work sessions have to be done specifically by amendment?
So the manager's budget under Missouri law is what's sent to you on the 19th. And so the
Correct.
council, in theory, for many years, and I'm not placing any blame because we all work differently, but it is a legislative action. Everything once the manager delivers that. So in theory, yes, that's.
Okay,
that's the point.
and I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
understand because it's so different from the process
Right.
we've used in the past. And I do think there's some benefit to it, but there's also often some things that we can fully agree on that
Right.
that process may be a little heavy for.
Well, and I think that's, for us as budget staff, it's important, right?
Yeah.
If there's a 5-2 vote, a 5-2 vote gives us clear direction.
Correct.
Rather than 5 voices saying you should do that and 2 really not happy about it. And well, what's the outcome? What does council want, right? So.
So tonight's the only time the council will have an opportunity to put their input into this process until April the 19th.
You can certainly put your input in at any point. We can have more conversations about process along the way, however you want. The budget under the charter and such is owned by the manager and we're
Right.
creating a recommendation, but your process, if you want to have more process conversations about your process and what you would like to have, you certainly can. We also recognize there's a new council coming, right? And so is will this council bind the process for the next council, such things like that. So those are not my decisions to make. They're council decisions and there's legalities about councils binding next councils and such. So
I think the only thing I would like to see, maybe every 60 days, somebody say, our schedule, we're on schedule with this calendar. Just to make sure that you're on target with it.
absolutely.
And just another aside on the budget, city manager implemented within the budget process, the document we got had some sort of narrative from the department heads, which I found very helpful. And I just want to say that I hope that stays in.
Yes, it will. Thank you.
And I think in prior budgets, there was always a narrative on the income, but not the expenses. If we can put that into this year's budget
So
process.
Yes.
we definitely can. There's a revenue summary that's in every budget, and that's simply because we do revenue from a central perspective rather than by department. So in reality, the department narratives become an expenditure narrative, but like we're planning with the capital plan to have a broader summary in plain language rather than just the charts and the tables about what is included in that. And with Jenny Starkey here now, we have some more design creative features as well to help, bring life to the budget as a document. As a communication document.
Good, thank you.
Eric, if I may. So you all will have those same budget documents from the department directors. And last year is also, I believe, the first time that department directors presented their own budgets. They will be doing that again this year as well. They are the subject matter experts. You guys can ask specific questions. So there certainly is opportunities for council to have additional inputs, and we want that input. Particularly, I don't know that one's more important than the other, but the ARP dollars, it is, it's a one-time shot in the arm, if you will. And so it's really important that we spend those dollars in a meaningful way. So we are really wanting the input. Thank you.
And when we get to the balancing act, I think we need to talk about process. In my mind, it's very convenient to put the ARP next to the regular city budget. And certainly this council could do that. They could say, we want to accelerate and make some decisions in March. So that's, again, your conversation and your decision. We're here to facilitate that. We just need to lay out, as we talk about ARP, that timeline, because we're viewing them as distinct operations.
Right.
Are they in conjunction with the budget or a separate process?
Let me ask one more question about the timeline, please.
Yep.
So we have the 19th to 3rd, April 19th, May 3rd, May 17th in terms of work sessions for the budget. Will we get departmental presentations across all 3 of those days? Or do we expect to lead off on April 19th with departmental presentations and then have some time for more discussion and follow-up questions and things? Yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like.
Sure. So my vision,
Uh-huh.
again, council process is that we would have departmental presentations on the 19th. But that we would not, and I think it's probably a different process than you've had, not have the SIP, the capital plan, be part of that presentation.
Okay.
Really, we're looking at the general operations and staffing budgets, on the 19th in terms of the presentations. The capital plan, which usually pulls on so many different other funds, would probably come on May 17th or potentially on May 3rd. We have to figure that out in conversation with you. So that you're not bombarded with, we're going to build a new building on top of how do we deal with overtime, right? I mean, those are wholly distinct type of budget types of questions. And in general, where I've been before, we've separated the capital budget from not consideration, but the discernment process.
Thank you.
I would suggest that you rethink April 19th a little bit. That's the night that you'll have all kinds of people being installed. You may have new council folks. I mean, take that into consideration that you don't really know who's going to be sitting up here on that day.
Madam Mayor,
So-
we decided if they wanted to be on council, it was rock and roll. We're-
Okay, all right,
Baptism by fire.
That's, that's the.
all
night.
right.
So, no, your words are taken under advisement. And so this
Yeah.
feedback that you're giving us now on the calendar is helpful as well. So we'll go back, discuss it, look at calendar dates and come back with
Yeah,
additional.
I just,
We originally, when I
Be
came here last year,
kind.
looked at this and, it was like, how can we get the budget to you all in March? Right, and
Mhm.
really have conversations, anticipating some of the conversations we're about to have. But council elections intervene, right? And obviously with a potential for changeover, those are, how much time do we leave for good discernment and not just simply have a process where here's a budget, please say yes. So,
yeah.
Mr. Ashcroft has his way. He won't interfere with the budget anymore.
All right, so 5-year plan. I'll pull it up here in a second, but I just want to talk through. The 5-year plan right now looks at the general fund. This is the first time you've seen this tool that we've created. It is looking at fiscal years 18 to 22 as our background of growth. Revenues are growing at about a little over 1%, 1.11%. Expenses are growing at 4.29% over that period. So deficits are planned. So I'm going to pull up stop this share and pull up the 5-year plan so you all can see that if I can find there it is. Boom. So this colorful document is in front of you on big pieces of paper. This is the 5-year plan. This is the front side of it that pulls in some data, and I'll walk you through that. I want to talk about the trends that we've seen. I'm going to start with revenue. So this is revenue from fiscal year, I'm going to slide up a little bit so you can all see this. Fiscal year 18, I think you can see my mouse on Zoom as well. Here's the dip in 20. Much of that is COVID. Big bounce in 21. There we are in 22. There's our trend line. I want to be very clear about this trend that you're seeing here. Because when I scroll one down here to the next chart, when you take out our general fund transfers for those years, that's our actual revenue trend. So we have used reserves every year since 19 to make this trend turn into that trend.
Just, false.
Correct. So we can characterize it however you wish, but what I'm trying to point out is that without the reserve, which at some point will not be a reserve anymore, this is the actual revenue trend line. So the real fiscal year 21 revenue is 14 million.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? We
ahead.
can't see the screen that you're sharing.
Oh, sorry
Oh,
about
no.
that. Let me pull that up and figure that out.
I know, I just saw. the same thing.
Yeah, it starts with the. It blew me away.
Can you see it now, Councilmember?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go back up and I'll just, for those that were on Zoom and couldn't see us here, come on, let's go. So this is the trend. This is the trend for revenue in 18 to 22 when you include transfers from the general fund. Now, every year there's some transfers to the general fund from other funds that are planned and necessary, right? And they're gonna happen. They're not material to the big transfers that save the revenue that we've been using to fill in, okay? So these numbers are a little bit off is what I'm getting at. We didn't back all those out for the purposes of demonstrating this. When you again look without those transfers, there's the trend line of revenue. And so 22, we've seen a bounce back up. Now this is budgeted revenue. We need to meet this revenue. This is a budget number for 22, but we've seen the dip with COVID, and there's our real hope without having to transfer. So I'm going to pause there and let y'all digest revenue trends because that's important to where we're going. So,
I think you've got a couple questions. You look like you're brewing on one.
No, yeah, I mean, I think this was expected, I mean, not expected, obviously, but I think that we all knew this. It's just eye-opening to see, and obviously in graph form.
We're having trouble with going backwards in the years.
Right to left instead of
Going
left
right
to
to
right.
left
Sorry.
instead of left to right.
Yeah.
That's
Start over
what
here and go
Laura
this
and
way.
I are- Yeah, you have to point that out
Yeah.
so that people understand.
So 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So when we look then, I'm just going to scroll up as you look at that, you can see here, and I shut down before the slides, this line is other financing sources, our transfers in. Here's the 1.8 we anticipate transferring in. 3.4 last year, that's the 2 million we transferred in plus the 1.5 in CARES money.
Yeah.
Right? You see that in that bucket there. So now we haven't added the $2 million deficit that exists to this budget. We haven't come to you and said, we need to move 2 million out to put it in. Last year's budget that was programmed half the way through the year, it got moved. This budget has not had it happen yet. We know it might be needed, but we just haven't done it. Now I want to look at expense trends. So you can all see the charts here. And so these, let me go back to the 5-year plan. We're using classifications. And so Councilmember Richardson, you could see, so there's probably 800 line items in every department's budget potential. Many of them are at zeros, but there's 800 objects. That's what we call the line item. So they are classified as what kind of service. So we use personnel services, materials and supplies, contractual services, capital outlay, and other expenditures. So the three that are relevant, capital outlay and other expenditures for the general fund, are minor. They're not material to the numbers, but you can see the trend of personnel cost from 18, 19, 20, 21, 22's budget.
And
see
would you
that?
talk about those more, please? I see
Certainly.
the-
So,
The
and-
questions.
Yep, so this is personnel services. This is salaries, overtime, fringe benefits cost, anything that relates to our hiring of people that goes into personnel. That is what this budget classification is across all the departments that draw on the general fund.
And in terms of number of employees, FY 18 to FY 22, what's the difference there?
154 to now 155,
So it's flat.
flat.
Okay.
So obviously, and again, when we look, and I'll actually pull it up right here so you can see, these are the whole charts that back all these up. Expense trends, you can see all the different departments and personnel that are drawing on the general fund. You can see the difference just between 22 and 21. So just between last budget and this budget, where we've seen growth along the way. But what I want to highlight here, and I hope you can all see my cursor, is last year was a 6.3% increase in personnel services. The year before, 4.5. The year before that, 2.8. When we go to 18 to 19, that was the year of under a 1% increase. That averages out to 3.6% across the years. And that's what we're using to build a 5-year plan on, that average growth. But just between 18 and now, the growth in personnel services is 15%.
So what's the cause of that?
Yeah.
Certainly. So, I mean, you've got a big cause, and we can look, if you look right here, I'm going to get the fire budget so you know where we're looking. Fire is on line 14. So there's the fire budget in 18, and there's 19, the start of steps. 100 and, was that about $190,000?
And that's also the first year that we entered the CBA.
Yes, and so that step CBA, that spot right there, that's the big jump in the pay for fire. A year later, if we look at police, 4.2, 3.8, 4.2. moving those departments. Not to
That was
highlight
the
those departments.
Introduction of steps in the police
The
department as
introduction,
well.
the introduction of
Yeah.
steps, raising of ranges. So we have historically, from my understanding, been an organization that hasn't compensated great. We've had a lot of, again, back to the benefit conversation, we're going to pay in benefits, which are later in career benefit versus upfront compensation. We started to change that paradigm, right? So we're starting to bring up compensation. Comp and class is going to bring up that conversation as well, but that doesn't give us, we haven't changed on the other things, right? So we're now enriching on this side of the scale, but not changing the other side, and all those benefits go up. So every time we adjust a salary, all the other corresponding features become more costly.
And our two most expensive departments, not surprisingly, are fire and police. It's public safety services, which of course is the norm across the nation and municipalities.
But there's some up there, there's one that grew by 53%. The third one down grew by 53%. There's another one that grew by 72%. What's the third one?
Which year are you looking at here, Mayor? Sorry, I'm with you.
At the end, growth in period.
Sure.
Number 4.
Number 3 is 52.983%. What department is that?
That is finance since 18. No, excuse me, human resources in personnel services. And I'll explain what that is. We started to centralize the payment for benefits in human resources. The benefit is a personnel service. So it's not just a person, but it's 53% of 246. So their total budget again is now 377.
But if you're looking at big
Yeah,
increases.
if you're looking
they're
at the
there.
increases by
There's a
percentage, correct, yeah.
72% increase. There's a.
Right.
That,
So 72, that is, now a $27,000 budget. And I think
that's not a
What
big deal, but.
that's legal services. So the percentages are not material to the, I mean, obviously a small percentage increase, 3 or 4% in fire is going to be much more of an impact on the budget versus a 70% increase in a one-person department of a part-time staff. So
Have we received this?
I'd like this.
Yeah,
No.
this is,
No,
would
you-
that be, is it?
I have no problem.
I would
Yeah,
like
because this is
that.
interesting. This is,
I would like that very.
how about
much.
number the 40%? I think it's line 18,
This one right there,
Down right there.
because that's a pretty,
that is Parks and Rec park maintenance. So that's 40%, 206, and 18, it was 146,000. So again, when-
Percentages are a little misleading. It's really the dollar amounts and
Yeah.
how much it's increased.
so obviously, I guess the question I have for you, Eric, and this is a question that might not be able to be answered, so I apologize for putting you on the spot like this, but what's the solution?
Can I peg that and we'll talk about the whole, look at the plan?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put a pin in that and I'll come back to, and I'll answer that. And I guess I would do want to answer rec fees and a couple other trends as well. So I'm just going to go back, expense charts, materials and supplies. This is stuff that we buy for the work that we do. Holding relatively steady. $800,000 is about the top end where we are in 22. That's holding steady, okay? Contractual services, not unsurprisingly, another growth between 2.9 million and 18 to now 3.8.
And what does that cover?
Contractual services is everything that we buy as a service. So that is not only the contract for an attorney or the contract for a part-time help, that's a contract worker, but it's our contract for web services. It's the services other people provide by contract, even if it's just a service and not a person.
So third-party
Exactly,
services.
third-party services and anything. We call that contractual services. These are the 3 classifications that when you look at what makes up the general fund, this is 99.95% of what we spend on the general fund. So these trend lines versus the other trend line you saw. That's the point I'm trying to make as we look at the 5-year plan, which we take all that back into the 5-year plan. And you will see on this top one, if we use the average growth, we take the 22 budget and just the average growth across the spending at 4.2861%. Here are your expense budgets in this line for the next 5 years. Now your revenue lines, this is where it gets interesting. You're going to see some negatives, right? That's COVID adjusting the average, okay? So this top scenario is simply the actual average of those revenues. So, this line of utility tax is down 1.1% over the last 5 years. That's the average loss. If we expected that to continue, that's going to affect revenue, right? And so that's what this scenario builds in and then shows you down here at the bottom, The structural deficit we have right now of 2.3 million, with those types of growths, an unsustainable growth of expenses well exceeding revenue, puts those kind of structural deficits in place 5 years out. But even, and where I want to go just to fix this before we go, even to fix the revenue and put them positive. So let's just think they're going to grow at the rate average growth of revenue, only changes the deficit $200,000, $300,000.
So I just want to understand this a little bit more in regards to in an alternative universe where COVID never occurred.
Mhm.
In fiscal year 19 and 20, we would still have likely have run a deficit.
So we, both Dr. Peoples and I were fond of, as we talked about the Coconino 10-year plan, but you can literally see an economic track of every 10 years of recession coming upon, right? We're in that. We were primed for that anyways, right? We think about the Great Recession, 18, 19, somewhere in that range, we should have had that recession hitting. It happened to happen with a pandemic that exacerbated it. So now we're looking at, another 10 years out from when we get out of this moment, right? I mean, this is unparalleled in what we've dealt with, because this has been, we all hoped last June that we were going to be closing down again. And now we're talking about virtualizing things again. So we talk about every 10 years, right? So we should have a 5-year plan that at least every other 5-year plan is identifying we're going to have a dip year, right? Because we're using some volatile revenue streams that are reflective of the economy. We're not like schools that have a property tax base relatively constant. So we certainly have a property tax base, but not like schools in the way that they're have a much bigger share of the property tax.
Okay.
Other questions?
It makes the utility tax absolutely imperative.
The utility tax, the use tax.
I mean,
think,
the
yeah.
use tax, the use tax.
The other thing
absolutely
and what we
imperative.
haven't built in here and what we really need to see some numbers to give you a better estimate on is the new gas tax. Right? And so what that will do for us.
Use tax, the
Right.
gas
So,
tax.
I just looking at this. So you're saying even if we have positive revenue growth for all of our potential revenue classifications, as of right now, if everything were to stay still, you're looking at an $8 million deficit in fiscal year 27.
Correct. Assuming the rate of growth, not stay still, assuming the rate of growth in expenses that we have seen. Okay, so if we hold everything in the line, that's a different story. If we were able to hold costs at this amount right here, what was it, 19.477, theoretically revenue, should it grow, is going to be at 15.9. So we got a $4 million deficit if costs are held. My point in pulling this out, and this tool is going to continue to go through refinement because there's things we want to add and get to. But ultimately, is these averages are the unsustainable averages. We're growing the budget by 4.1%. The revenues are only growing by about 1%. Now, COVID's exacerbated that average down. We see years in the past where we got some 18, 20% growth in certain line items that I found in files that we have, but we don't know how to plan for revenue now because it's a whole new economy coming out of this, right? I mean, what is our rec center attendance going to look like? We hope for something like we've had, but is it going to be the same? Are we going to have utility taxes affected by climate change in a way we can't deal with? What's the legislature going to do? There's all sorts of unknowns that we can't add into the mix of a plan in a lot of ways. Just the aggravating part about budgeting.
So it's prudent to use the numbers we have to make the projections.
That would be my hope.
If I may, Councilman Franklin, I really appreciated your question that you asked. And so, how do we fix it? It's a complicated answer that isn't going to be answered tonight. But we're going to have some really uncomfortable conversations. And that is the answer. We're going to have to talk about some of these things, we're going to have to hold the spending line, which is going to be difficult because there's going to be other areas such as technology that we're going to need to continue to increase spending in. We've got to be able to be efficient, deliver services in a different manner. Perhaps there's going to be some cases where we're losing staff and we're not necessarily replacing them immediately. We're going to have to look at doing some things like that. And of course, we've already had the policy discussion in terms of looking at human resources policies again, and how do we change some of those things to affect the bottom line. The other, opportunity that we have right now is the revenue replacement through ARP. And I know that council wants to do some things for community, and I want to do those things as well. So it's really about how do we balance those things? You know, how much is used for revenue replacement? Should council choose to use any of it? And then how much do we put into new programming? And as we have those conversations, how much of new programming would be one-time programming or sustainable throughout the course and adding into the budget? So there's a lot of things to think about.
So if we were to use all of the federal funds for revenue replacement, I know, just assuming.
Just
but,
assuming, okay.
you know, what would it look like what would our deficit be then in fiscal year 2027? Would it just decrease it by 4 million, or is there an,
Still be 8 million.
Still, yeah.
It would still be 8.9 million
Yeah.
because you'd use it
It's a
all in
short-term
1
fix,
year.
yeah.
It's a short-term fix. and
So
it's
you'd
gone.
be using really out of the 4.6, 2.3 right now in this budget, holding the reserve you have, because you can't put it into reserve, right? So we put it into the operating budget, fill that hole. If we manage to the budget, if we manage better in the budget, great, we save some. And then the next 2.3 would cut that number down only in that year, right? But again, costs continue to compound on that. The number may change a little bit on the end, but it's still going to be, it's not going to pull it down in any material way. So, and again, this is sorry about that, Councilmember Rich, and I'll put the camera back on me. The deficit is a structural issue about the arc of spending, back to those trends, and the arc of revenue, right? And that's going to be some really hard decisions, not just about people, but even right down to what services do we provide? What is of value for the community? We do a lot of great things for the community, but what's needed and what's necessary, and what do we use taxes to pay for?
Well, and I think the reason I'm asking that question is because obviously I think there's going to be, as we go out to the community and ask them what should we use these federal funds on, there's going to be a lot of people saying use it on revenue replacement. But that doesn't solve the long-term effects. And I think that's something important that we educate the citizens about, that even if we were to use it and we were permitted to use every single dime from the federal government on our revenue replacement, we still have a long-term problem that we still have to address, which would require us to look at personnel, require us to look at services, require us to look at everything.
All the ARP funds do, if we use them in that way, is we move this decision that we're talking about potentially making relatively soon out a year, maybe a year and a
Right.
half.
Little time.
I'm going to get to rec fees.
Yes,
Councilwoman.
please.
So,
Although I think I know a little bit about that now that we've,
rec fees are right here. Recreation fees are on line 10. So you can see in 18, we did 2.1, 2.13 in 19, dropped way down in 20,
Yeah.
1.4 up to 1.5. We budgeted 1.8 in 22. So, our really last good year, 20, if you remember, the last 2-3 months of, no, maybe 4 months of budget year in fiscal year 20 is when the pandemic started.
Yeah.
So that's where you see the big drop off into that summer. This is 2 summers of COVID, right? We got this past summer, we had a few, we were able to open some things up, but then we had to shut back down with the Delta wave coming through. So this budget we're in, budget's 1.8 in expenses, revenue from rec fees. So
okay, thank you.
you're welcome. We will continue to refine this and gather some other folks. I have colleagues that are looking at this as well and giving some insight on what they think for revenue targeting and such to look at. Obviously, it is not good budgeting practice for us to start fiddling with revenue numbers to make it look better on paper than it actually is. But we want to make sure to give you good information so that you can make the decision, the value decision that needs to be made about revenue. So, and that we can educate the citizens well.
But budget 22 is the time we need to start making these decisions.
Yep.
Which is actually budget 23.
Yeah, budget 22.
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
I'm kind of having flashbacks to former council member Bud Belomo, pretty much pointing this out in fiscal year as we were looking at 20. He's like, you guys had some long-term problems that no one's really addressing here.
Yeah, and I looked at this, probably the same spreadsheet you did, David, that Bud presented,
Yeah.
and it showed exactly this. We were living off our transfer of funds, this, and we're doing fine. It's really, really not.
And I guess, and it's kind of hard to, again, wrap my head around. It's like I've just listened to the pat on the back about this big, huge reserve that we were maintaining, but nothing showing what type of budget and deficit we were running while we were maintaining some huge reserve.
We
That's-
weren't
I mean-
running deficits. I mean, you can't,
No, what we're running into, we're running into, we are running toward
what we're running toward is
Yeah.
a
terrible.
deficit, just based upon continuing to have the expense trend,
Yeah.
just looking at it based upon, what exists
I
and
know.
just carrying that forward, that was you're running toward a deficit trend.
Yeah.
At the same time, I guess I've never seen this laid out like this, but you just heard it set up in the meeting with the comments, with the open meeting with the city has always run a $10,000 or $12,000 reserve, and so what's going on, I don't know what type of communication has been given publicly that what's going on is business as usual is going to create
Well, we've never had a 5-year
plan.
something in front of us, right?
Yeah.
So it's harder to see that trend, I think, if you don't have a tool like this in front of you.
But I think just really looking at that pure number of how the average revenues versus the average expenditures and that growth rate really makes a difference, because you're not wrong, Councilwoman Alexander, in terms of you can't pass the budget with a deficit, but we were making, or the past practices were to make that budget whole by transferring from the reserves. And so that really gets to what you're saying. And so making sure that we have growth to match the expenditures. And that is what we will do moving forward and continue to bring this to council.
It wasn't that long ago that people were asking us to spend our reserve money on the citizens. And it's like literally been reserved for budget or revenue replacement at this point.
Do we have any figure? This is the average growth rate that you have calculated for the next 5 years, correct?
That average growth comes from the average growth we've experienced over the last 5 years.
Okay, that's what I wanted
So
to
this
know.
is the trend, this 4.2 and the 1.1 go back to all the way down to expenses, sorry.
So it's the past 5 years.
Correct, yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to.
So we'll provide, obviously you have this document, we'll happy to provide the other pieces that you can look at them and such
That'd be
like that.
good.
Again, this is not the budget. This is a tool to help understand budget decisions and their impact ongoing. Councilmember Alexander, I'm happy to provide for you, and this is part of the job we have to communicate budgets. The condition statements for each of these budgets show the deficit that was there and how much was being transferred.
Mhm.
But if you don't know what to look for in a condition statement, it looks like some red numbers and some black numbers, and what's that mean, right? And so that's part of what I believe is our mandate in this next budget, is to improve the communication of the budget. So as we look at the calendar that you had in front of you, kicking off the budget, we do that with public to balancing act, is really kicking off what's the fiscal position of the city. And I want to be very clear to the public, we're not going bankrupt anytime soon. This is not light your hair on fire, the city's going bankrupt. We're not. We have good reserves and we will manage, but we need to make decisions that again address the arc of those two trends that are going in opposite directions. We need them to go in the same direction at about the same pace. So
Pretty scary.
Yeah, it's scary. And what's scary also is what does that communication look like? Because as it is, we already have factions saying that if this is just being created by the current city manager and the current council and what have you. And so how do you communicate the reality of this and what we need to do going forward? That this has developed over time. This isn't something that just happened because all of a sudden we made a change that blew up our expenses and revenue and expenditures.
Agreed.
That's a challenge.
It absolutely is a challenge, and we do so without trying to place any blame, but we can look back at the facts, right? The budgets are facts. We can look back 5 years and say, here's a trend going this way, but we kept spending this way, right? And so that's without judgment on the decisions, this is where we've been. So that's created the conditions we're in. This is what we think we need to do to go out of it, but we need the community's input on that as well, right? I mean, I can easily look at things and say, Eric Peterson would cut that, right? And solve the problem. But this community values certain things that I may not, have that same kind of input on. So.
You nailed it, Karen.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna be honest, I don't want people pointing bullets at Marie, saying the new city manager mismanaged or mismanaged funds or whatever. I mean, I'm just, I guess the word of the day is optics.
You avoid that by talking about what really happened here. And
again,
I think that's the
Mayor, without
communication.
pointing fingers and looking like, to Eric said, like you're blaming anybody.
No, you
It's
don't.
just-
We really shouldn't be blaming anybody, but we really ought to be looking at what has truly happened here. And I see things like the fines. We used to get $1 million a year or so out of
600.
600,000 out of fines, and that because of what's happened with the municipal courts. I mean, that has declined tremendously. You have to look at that. You have to look at the recreation fees that have declined tremendously. I mean, so that's part of the communication, so that rather than putting blame somewhere on previous or current or anybody, let's get the facts out here about what has truly happened.
Yeah, because I don't even think, I was really surprised in that, just a couple of weeks ago, when Kathy Hart stood up here asking questions about where's the money or where is this or that. Some of the things just seem obvious. I don't think that we are exclusive as a municipality.
No.
In dealing with just the impacts of COVID and how severe those are. In addition to even if you're looking at the trends over the last 5 years, but even the impact of.
Yeah, people shopping online now, the weather being really good. I mean, there's just a lot of things here that have contributed to a decline in revenue. And I think we avoid the blame game by looking at what the facts are.
And I think also being very transparent about this. So I appreciate, Eric, your statement already that this is all up on the budget website. So that everybody can see it and everyone has the same set of
Exactly.
numbers
Right.
from which to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. That's
And also what you said, Eric, about we can't return to, pre-pandemic life and return to what was done or how it was done. I mean, we are in a new economy. We are in a new situation. Returning doesn't make
It's
sense
not
because
option.
it helped create, unfortunately, this situation.
I wanted to just say, add to your same sentiments that I'm hearing, but just thank you, Eric, for this, for all of the information, the time, the holidays. I can't imagine were much fun for you. But this is really, really helpful, and it's the kind of stuff we need.
So anything more on this before we dive into ARP?
no.
I know we're going well over time here, so, but it's
All right.
important conversation, so,
Let's dive into the ARP.
all right. Did you need, Councilmember Smith, did you have a comment? Okay, sorry. All right, so let me get to.
That's 7:50. That was our goal end of the
So
meeting.
this is just highlighting again, trying to get out of this.
You really meant 58 slides, didn't you?
It's all in there, and it's all on the budget website, so everyone can look at it. I need to pull this down so I can find the ARP. There we are. Boom, ARP, there we are. So you've all seen Balancing Act. I think you've seen this draft. The public has not seen this. This is the public's first time. So I'm going to walk through a couple things. There's some big questions I know, namely the money and how many things are on this, but let me just walk through a couple of the particulars first. This is the welcome screen. We'll have Mayor Welch record a video that can play here too, explaining what goes on, offers help and such along the way. So again, if you have any comments about text or such that we've included, please let us know. This screen here has got some mandatory questions, residents we want to know. So I'm just going to pick out one. Yes. I'm going to put in you type in a postal code, Katie, 63119. Thank you. So one thing you can't do it from just a mouse. There we are.
And-
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all we needed. And now what this does here, this allows people to pick where they live in Webster Grove. So you can scroll in on the map and such. I'm just going to say I live over here. And so drop the pin.
I didn't know. I just hit.
Right. And that gives us some geo-targeting of where answers are coming from. So example, if Tuxedo Park saying, fix my damn road, we have some pins on Tuxedo Park saying, fix my road. So this is balancing act and the conversation that we've had about this project. The draft shows us in deficit. Why? Because we have well over 55 items that we have heard from you, from the Business Roundtable, from other folks that are ideas. And instead of and I know this question is going to come. So we defaulted to putting some numbers in so that people would go through and have to eliminate funding. So that's why we see a deficit. It's explained as well in some of the text. We can change that. That's what we want to hear the direction about tonight. I'm just going to scroll through this real quick. I'm going to skip the spending is locked, so they can't change the 4.6. They get a little pop-up bubble, what kind of info and such that, you know, is there. And then what the residents and you and everyone, employees can do is change in these categories, these items. So I'm going to pick utility tax rebate for low-income seniors. I think that's a great idea. We should spend a lot more. And I can click the plus button, boom, 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 and you can see my numbers going up. And I've now spent $300,000 on that project. And I want people to know it's a good project. I can click add a comment and boom, type in my comment that will come in with my submission. It's a great project. I'm going to vote against you all if you don't fund this project. So, but I really don't like the high school entrepreneurship education. So I negative and take away, and now I'm at 0 and it tells me I need to confirm my change. I do that. I'm at 0. I've spent nothing on that project. If I want to know what those projects are, we've created the more info button and tells me essentially what this would do. Now, a lot of these programs, initiatives, ideas, topics were literally 1 or 2 words from people. We should do this, right? And so there's a lot of Eric Peterson and Marie Peoples and Jenny Starkey and others. What does that mean? What does that look like? Put that in the sense of how a government could operate a program. What is not in here is what's out of bounds with ARP. We didn't try to say you can't do that or you can't do that, right? So it's really what's the public saying, and then it's our job to figure out how does it comply if we're going to do that and fit the mold. There are many different categories. We grouped it by residents, people. Through the housing, we heard some housing issues, business and the nonprofit community, public infrastructure has the biggest section, city workforce, work culture and environment, and then your ideas. Importantly, if they have ideas, a whole free box, you just simply add your comment, what you want to fund, and hit the plus button and keep adding up. I do want to I'll come back to a couple of things. Actually, let me do it right now. Scenario questions, because I know this will come up. Why is repair the city hall flat roof, which comes off of our facility conversation with Todd Ray? Why is this a yes, no, and not a plus or minus? We could have done it that way. And some people could say, I only want to put $10,000 into that, but we know the cost. So we said yes or no. If they say no, we take $75,000 off. So that's why some are scenario questions versus that. If you think we should do it a different way, and like the other ones, plus and minus, we can certainly do that. Easy to change. And then ultimately, no one can, and I want to thank Jenny Starkey, she did this the other night at home. You can't hit the submit button because you're in deficit.
Oh, good.
So they have to spend either 4.6 million or less.
Or less.
You can have a surplus or you have to spend it right on the money. We've added some language here about how they can connect with us if they have questions, but also very clear language that this doesn't obligate us. This is input. This is not the decision because you voted this way, it happens. And it also doesn't represent the city budget. So I know we've gone on a long time tonight, so I want to stop. And really it's about your thoughts on the tool as you've looked at this, concerns. And I think the big question probably is it too much in there? Do we, in light of the other conversation, want to put more in revenue replacement, other kind of conversations?
So I spent a lot of time with this and I frankly loved it because it's like the budget simulations I do in my American government classes. I think it's a fantastic tool. I am concerned that we have 62 different items for people to make some decision on. And if you start in deficit fully, then you're forcing them to make a decision on every one of those 62 things. If we can default it to where you're starting at 0 and you're accumulating what you're spending, then people may spend more time with the tool. My fear is one of two things will happen. Either people will give up and decide they don't really want to do this because it's too much work, or two, our data will not be great because people will concentrate on the first half more than they will on the second half because they get tired along the way of making decisions. And so my personal preference, and obviously it's not my decision alone, would be to have the default setting be your 0, and then we're going to spend from there on.
I do like the deficit process because I guess if we do it just the opposite, can they hit submit if they didn't spend the entire amount of money?
They still can do that here too.
Not if they're,
You can't be in deficit, but you can
Be in surplus.
So you can just go in and pick some things that you think you would like to see the money spent on, but you don't have to like go through and complete an entire task and
That's correct.
the entire budget, whatever, and
With what
balance
Councilwoman
before you
Arnold
can
just said.
submit.
I don't know. I like the being forced to cut things that I like. Like I felt like that was useful. You know, I think that's that's a helpful exercise to go through. I thought, I don't know. I thought it was I don't know. I thought it was great, like how it is. But I also agree there is a lot. And it takes a lot of commitment to kind of get all the way to balance.
So did anybody do every single option? I know how to do this,
I
and it
opened
took
it
me
up.
almost
Yeah,
45
okay,
minutes.
I
Yeah.
thought it was great.
No,
mean,
I
it was
agree
great
with you.
fun.
As I said, I love the tool. I just worry about if we continue to have 62 choices and start in a deficit, I don't think our data is going to be as good fundamentally.
Is there a way of switching those key things where it says investing in Webster residents, investing in housing, and the public infrastructure, maybe just switching some of those around a little bit so
We can move those around. So
move
these-
those around so that the first two don't come up always as the first two, because that's where a
Randomize
lot
the
of,
order.
that's where a lot of the time is in those first two.
and based on our
Areas.
last conversations with the development, it's clear that the community have some goals they want to achieve. Let them, they want to fix the flooding,
Yeah,
that's what.
that's a public
And then that'll
infrastructure.
take away that 1.2 million. Say, this is all I got left. So you can see exactly how that affects it, impacts. Because I can see a lot of, I like the idea about starting the entrepreneurship with the high school and things of that nature, but I want to see it, I want to see the flood fix first. I mean, so.
And I wonder if that 1.3 million is necessary. I mean, that's Mr. Stock's estimate. Maybe we need a second.
What's the number we can just start with?
I don't
And,
know.
and Public Works gave us that, and we're using that number because that's also the Elmet Kirkham estimate.
No.
So there's two culverts in there. One is already funded.
So we fix one culvert, not the other. Okay.
Right, so we've got, one is already funded, and it was a real question, do we want to, because it's going to zero out and put the stormwater funded deficit if we do it, do we want to move ARP into that, right? I mean, those are the kind of contextual decisions in that one.
Oh, I think it's fun. I think people will get caught up with it. and-
Sure. So, I mean, we can randomize, I think that,
I would
and I don't mind
randomize.
going to 0, that's easy. If there are things that are way out in left field for you all, I mean, there's some, we looked at some of this and we need to do sustainability. So there's a lot of Eric Peterson with electric vehicle charging stations and others trying to, what's sustainability? What are the things that are primed? If there are things, and I'm not saying take sustainability out, but if there are ideas that you just aren't going to add value to this and want to shorten that 62 down to 40, I mean, that's the kind of input we could use as well, because we can easily eliminate some of the ideas.
What's the harm in letting them submit with a deficit?
Well, the whole point of this, I mean, if we want to submit with a deficit, we certainly can. We can turn that on. The whole point being is to drive some quantitative data towards what is actually arriving that wants to be spent on, right?
It becomes
So-
what I think you need as opposed to what I want.
The data is very limited if people can just click all of them. And Councilwoman Arnold, you asked if others had went through it, and I don't think Councilwoman Bliss would mind me sharing, but she did send some notes. She did go all the way through it as well, and sent some detailed feedback. She had some suggestions for categories as well that I can't remember off the top of my mind. She did like each of those. options so that people were kind of, if you will, forced to go through it as well. But there is not a right or wrong way to do this. We could do it many different ways. What we really wanted to walk away with tonight are any categories either that you don't want in there because they're not council options, for instance, that, you know, they're not a value to this council, you don't think they fit, so that we could slim some of those down. If there are priorities, how do we highlight those? Because we do want the data to be meaningful and to matter. But the other piece of this is it's, you know, Eric made light of, you know, there's a lot of Eric Peterson and Marie Peoples. There really isn't, maybe in the descriptions, but we really did take this from the surveys that we have given to the community, from the business roundtable. Some of these things came from you all during the ARP surveys. I mean, these are things that we've heard, and the plethora of the information probably came from the Douglas Hill commentary. So these are things that we've heard from community. So if any feedback that you guys can give, and it doesn't have to be tonight, if you want an opportunity to go through and click some more, if there's ways that we can slim it down, we certainly will.
I'm sorry, you may have told us this before, but where did this tool come from? This is really cool.
The Balancing Act it's a program built by a gentleman named Chris Adams, who was many years in local government, city, county government. We use Balancing Act in Milwaukee County when we were approaching like a wheel tax or a car vehicle fee that was a local option. And I found it to be a great tool in the big counties, really to engage with people about, you know, you want a transit system that's owned by the county, but you got to pay for it somehow. You can't just have without paying for. So that it forced that citizen interaction. So this tool exists. We purchased a 5-year agreement with them at less than $10,000. So we can use it for anything. I've seen it used for housing. You want to have conversations about housing, what kind of housing you want to build. This tool has been used for that as well, outside of just budgets. There's ways to use it. So we can use it for any kind of engagement tool.
All right. Okay, we'll send you any ideas that we have. It sounds like we're really supportive of this and like it, and we'll get some good information from it. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
That was
Eric.
wonderful.
All right, that's very good. All right, we'll take I think we have, wait a minute, we have to figure out our February meeting. And then we can go into our regular meeting. Katie has suggested Monday, February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, which of course we'd all love to come here. Especially our newly married David Franklin. So then we have Wednesday, February 16th. How does Wednesday, the 16th seem for you?
Good.
Good?
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay.
Wednesday, the 16th.
Wednesday, the
What,
16th.
Madam Mayor and members, everyone who's going to Jeff said he'll be back.
Yeah, it's over. in
It
the
ends
morning.
at like
No,
9:30.
I figured, I just wanted to
Yeah,
make sure
'cause
you
we-
didn't have other plans. So
In the olden days, we used to go to the Capitol on that Wednesday morning, but now it's set up to go on
Tuesday.
Tuesday afternoon, so. Wednesday works? All right, Miss Kate.
Thank you.
Just take a 3-minute break, please. Okay.
I believe that's your call.
I'm calling for a 3-minute break. All right, good evening and welcome to our work session, and we apologize for taking such a long time with our work session, but we learned some very good and important information, which I think the public probably appreciated also. So we'll start with the roll call.
Mayor Welch,
Here.
Councilmember Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Bliss is absent. Councilmember Franklin,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Alexander,
Here.
Councilmember Richardson.
Here.
All right, do we have any remarks? Is there any raised hands?
Oh, there's one.
One.
Mr. Buck.
Dave Buck. All right, Mr. Buck.
Can you hear me?
3 minutes,
Go ahead.
yes.
Okay. I'd like to rise above the numbers and help kick off the new year on 3 specific positive notes. First, I salute the 19 total candidates who have stepped up to run for city council or school board. This level of active community engagement in our elections is unprecedented during my 20 years here, and I wish them all the best of luck. Second, I salute all those behind November 30th, which to me was the city's best day last year, and it marked the first ever community information session at Hickson on behalf of Douglas Hill versus one-way public comments, Facebook posts, and mailbag letters. Something amazing happened. Despite 2 years of deep division, residents on opposing sides were actually coming together and actually talking to each other respectfully and peacefully. It was civil discourse at its finest and reaffirmed the character of our people. Third, on a personal level, I want to salute both City Council and city staff for how each of you have taken the time and made the effort to communicate with me or reach out and include me in certain initiatives like the hiring of new Fire Chief Brett Ellis. Woo! It is not about responsive government, but something deeper and more powerful than that. It's about each of you living the core values of human acceptance and inclusion. And simply stated, you boosted my self-esteem and trust, made me feel valued and that I belong and that I matter to you and our city. Among all of your possible strategic planning goals or campaign election platforms, I cannot think of a higher level need for every resident or true mission of our city government. Finally, to my friend Laura, thanks for your recent email, but please know you can never, ever rain on my parade. Barb and I were married while it was raining heavily outside, which is a sign of good luck. It has come true. Besides, it's not rain, it's liquid sunshine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any other hands up?
None.
Okay, with that, then we'll move on to new business. Councilmember Smith, could you call for 9176, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the first and second reading of bill number 9176.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Bill 9176, first reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, authorizing and directing the submission of a ballot proposition to the qualified voters of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri on April 5, 2022, to consider the question, quote, shall there be a charter review advisory board to make recommendations to the city council to revise and amend the charter, unquote.
Any questions or comments? Go ahead with the second reading.
Bill 9176, second reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, authorizing and directing the submission of a ballot proposition to the qualified voters of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri on April 5, 2022, to consider the question, shall there be a charter review advisory board to make recommendations to the city council to revise and amend the charter?
All right, Bill 9177, Councilwoman Arnold, please.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the first and second reading of bill number 9177.
Second.
Bill 9177, first reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, amending Chapter 42, licensing and regulation of liquor, Article 1, intoxicating liquor, by amending Section 42.023, licenses required, categories, and Section 42.050, regulation of retail package sales, conditions of license, and matters related thereto.
Any questions or comments? Do the second reading.
Bill 9177, second reading. An ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, amending Chapter 42, licensing and regulation of liquor, Article 1, intoxicating liquor, by amending Section 42.023, licenses required, categories, and Section 42.050, regulation of retail package sales, conditions of license, and matters related thereto.
Does anybody care to remove anything from the consent agenda? If not, Councilmember Franklin, could you call for its approval, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the approval and the subsequent adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
Councilmember Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Mayor Welsh.
Yes. All right, we have no appointments this evening to boards and commissions. Councilwoman Arnold is going to call for the executive closed session.
Yes, Mayor, I move for an executive closed session regarding attorney-client privilege communications, Missouri statute 610.021, open paren 1, close paren.
Second,
Councilmember Franklin,
yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Mayor Welsh.
Yes.
Councilmember Arnold.
Yes.
All right, we will go into closed session and I guess you can just say thank you to all of you participants, all 16 of you who joined us this evening. We're glad that you were here with us and one of these days we'll return to in person again. Thank you.
Sarah, you'll join us on the other link? Thank you.